Hi, welcome to Culture and Causation. I'm Aaron Briley. And today's a special show, not only because I'm interested in the topic, but also because we have two guests today instead of one. I'm interviewing Blair Schofield and Martin Lindeskog from the Secular Foxhole podcast. And today, we'll get into what they're up to at the Secular Foxhole, and we'll also discuss a topic that arose when I was on their show a few weeks ago, and that is racism and how one should rationally think about it. But first, let me welcome my guests to the show. Blair and Martin, welcome to the show. So you have a podcast with a very interesting name called the Secular Foxhole. And I was wondering if either of you could briefly describe how you came up with the name and what topics you discuss on the podcast.
Well, I originally, this was back in 2004, and I was starting a blog, and I had two names in mind. The short one, which I picked, and I'll give you the other one because it's kind of funny. The Secular Foxhole was the one I picked, but the other one was Fish Wrap, because what else are newspapers good for?
Right.
But I picked the Secular Foxhole because I thought it was more provocative and more in line with what I wanted to convey, if you will. I know it in a certain sense it has a military connotation, but it wasn't really using that in that way. I wanted to find a secure place, if you will, where I could look out into the world and hopefully find like-minded people. So that was the main issue. I stuck with the Secular Foxhole.
I see. What topics do you discuss on the podcast?
Well, the main gist of our show, and we're still fleshing that out, is we want to convey the separation of church and state. And we've had a few people on that convey those issues, but mostly it's, I know a lot of people in the objectivist community. And so we've had a lot of guests from the Ayn Rand Institute and from independent scholars of objectivism on our show so far.
Okay. Sounds like, so you're looking at issues involving the separation of church and state. So maybe some political issues, some cultural issues. This is from an objectivist perspective. Is that right?
It is from an objectivist perspective in a way, but it's not an objectivist show per se. We are not an official objectivist podcast.
Okay.
We are objectivist or student of Miss Rand's philosophy.
Yes.
And we say, our goal is separation, church and state in America, but I say also religion and state. You could believe in whatever you want as you don't force it to somebody else. But then we also want to spread rational ideas, and that's Miss Rand's philosophy. Again, we are not official spokesmen or individuals for her philosophy.
I'm really curious how people get introduced to Ayn Rand's views. So could you just maybe briefly tell us how you both got introduced to her views?
I started in my mid-teens and in the mid-80s. So then I was searching for an integrated system of thoughts and ideas. I was interested in politics, and then I was looking for something more, as I said, a whole, integrated. And then I found some leading objectivists in Sweden, and I then subscribed to Dr. Leonard Peikoff's cassette courses. And we rented them, and we had to sign a contract. And then we started like you could say a study group for that. And then it turned out to become more active, and we started a philosophical magazine called Lyceum.
Okay.
Of Aristotle. And then we went to book fair, the big book fair in Gothenburg for some years, and also started like you could say a campus club or something like that. So that's my way of doing it, searching for something, an integrated system of ideas and thoughts coming from the political field in a way, and then found the objectivism and read Rand's work, started with the Fountainhead and continue with her works and others. Yeah.
Great. And how about you, Blair?
Well, I was roughly 23, living in Nashville at the time. And I had developed a friendship with a coworker. And to be self-deprecating, I was basically someone who read the sports page and the Sunday funnies. So this friend of mine, who is still one of my dearest friends to this day, he said, "Why don't you read this book?" And it was The Fountainhead. And I said, "Well, sure. Okay." And I can tell you it blew the cobwebs out of my brain, if you will. It was just an incredible, eye-opening experience. It was, that was, I think, 1979 when I was roughly 23.
Question about that, Blair. So when a person recommends to read a 700-page book, did you have any uncertainties or apprehension about reading it? Or, you just jumped right in?
We had been friends for quite a while, or, a year or two, and I trusted his judgment. Yeah, I just took the book and started reading it. And it was from the first page. I've been hooked.
Now, I'd love to get your opinions, actually, on one of the biggest battles of our time, as far as I'm concerned, and that's the fight over whether Western civilization, with its institutions and customs, is morally good or bad. And, this is something that I deal with on my podcast, and I think this fundamental question is expressed in many ways. And one way is whether Western, civilization is irredeemably racist and oppressive to non-whites. So that would apply, it would apply here in the States, in Canada, it would apply in Western Europe, in Australia. So this is something that so many different countries have to deal with now. And so I want to start with you, Blair.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious on what your thoughts are about this. But when you hear claims that the U.S. is an oppressive, racist country, and when you see that, when you see the rioting that we had in 2020, how do you conceptualize it? Is it like a mass confusion or something else? And, what would you say to someone who claims that the U.S. is a racist country? Now, I know those are quite a few questions there, so you can choose one or answer three or anything that you like.
I'll try to unpack those. I would fundamentally deny or disagree that America is a racist country. Now, we did have slavery, but what I would stress to someone who has the opposite view is there was a new philosophic principle that the founders wanted to establish, which is the principle of individual rights, which had never been done before, never even been heard of until that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that they were brilliant enough to say, well, let's create a country based on this idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the opposition from the South,
right?
And unfortunately, and most people gloss over the fact that Jefferson wrote, he put the end of slavery in the Declaration, but the Southern people were walked out unless he struck it out. So,
mm-hmm.
And then of course, we fought a civil war, which is the worst, bloodiest kind of war to have in a nation to end that cancer, which is also, I think, too conveniently forgotten. So I would, those are some of the points I would bring up to those who think that America is an oppressive society. Now, another way to look at it, if I may just take another moment,
sure,
is that I think the Democratic Party has institutionalized
mm-hmm.
slavery, if you will, by forbidding minorities from participating in the capitalist system. You have minimum wage laws. You have
mm-hmm.
many of these entitlement programs to keep people down, if you will. I'm thinking more and more people are seeing, immorality of that and breaking free of that.
Well, that's a really good point. I just want to kind of recap what you said in the first point. I think that's something, you're right, that people don't quite understand, is that slavery had existed from the Romans and the Greeks to the Africans.
It's still going on there.
Europeans, absolutely. And the fact that we came along and instituted an official document that enshrined the individual, even though it wasn't fully borne out in our practices and our customs until much later. Like you mm-hmm. said, we had a war and everything over it. And even after the war, we still had some issues in the South during the Jim Crow South. And so there's a lot of things to work out. But the point is, they were trying to reconcile what was happening in the country with this ideal that was laid down, as you said, in our founding documents. So I think that's a great point that you brought up. So fundamentally, we had this germ or this seed in our founding documents, which then, enabled this country to get to the state where we, abolish slavery and are treating people as individuals. Even though some of these things, it was an incremental process. It didn't just happen all at once. Certainly now in 2021, this is no longer an issue, although people make it an issue.
Yes.
I don't think it is. And
Sadly.
then your second point, though, about getting people dependent on the welfare state.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Is deeply problematic. And, I don't know. I mean, I know you're just using this as a metaphor. Maybe it's not quite slavery, but it certainly, it has that effect of getting people dependent on a system. And I think after generations of this happening, in some sense, people, they appear to lose their will for independence, and they almost appear to lose their agency. And I was going to ask one more question.
Sure.
I'll ask another question for you, Blair, and then I want to get Martin's opinion on the state of affairs in relation to, race and racism in Sweden. And my other question for you, Blair, is this notion that we're hearing now. It's a derogatory term. It's been gaining prominence for quite some time. And it's the idea of cultural appropriation. What are your thoughts about this?
I enjoy different cultures. I want to try Indian food. I enjoy Chinese food. What America is, when I was a youth and until like the last 20 years, America was thought of as a melting pot from people around the world where you could come and live free. I think that's unfortunately been swept aside.
To me, it seems like, and let me know if you agree with this, and also Martin, if you have any thoughts too, please, you're more than welcome to chime in. But it seems to me that this idea, when we speak of cultural appropriation, when we speak of culture, I think of the beliefs, ideas, values, habits that people hold. But these things are immaterial. And so to me, it seems like this is a collectivist view that says that values and beliefs are the property of certain people on the basis of their biology, on the basis of their genes or of their blood or something. Does it strike you as a very collectivist
and racist
viewpoint?
I mean, if that's not racism, I don't know what it is. As Blair said, with melting pot, how it started. And I see this as a political correctness trend, a very dangerous one. So I think it's totally, wacko, and it should be said like what it is and pointed out. May I have time to do a quote regarding America? A quote from Andrew Bernstein's essay, America, a Racist Nation, ? For those white racists still with us, civilians or cops, you must learn, understand, and act the theme of this essay. Colorblind individualism is the only rational policy for human beings to enact. If you don't learn this, then you must be morally condemned, socially contracticized, and if you are a cop, fired from your job. There is no place for white racism in a nation founded on the principle of individual rights. And you can find the essay on andrewbernstein.net.
I want to ask you, Martin, just to get your perspective, because you're from and live in Sweden. Does this kind of racial tension exist in Sweden? And if so, who is it between? And what are both sides claiming?
Yeah, and what I should say about that is, in a way it does, in a way it doesn't.
Okay.
But you have, as I said, and I would say for the record then, that I'm for open immigration, totally, in a philosophical way, and migration also. That I, for example, could go to America.
Yeah.
But now we see like parallel societies with clans coming from different countries and others, and taking over parts of like where I'm from in Gothenburg, where police they're afraid to go there now.
Into certain sections?
Yes.
Of the city?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
and is this
they know who controls it. It's like a clan that control it, and they control the mob and the mafia. And they're also using the system by handouts and other things like that.
I have a question, actually, Martin, if I can. Are these areas separated? Are these like religious communities, or are they ethnic communities, or both, or what?
Both. That's the thing. It's coming up when the Social Democrats now want to build, suburbs and put same so-called people. I mean, I have no problem with that, but it's better to mix in a way. But to certain people coming from other places and put them in the same place. And then you get this tension, and then you build these big places, and it getting slums. You can't say like you have in maybe back in the day in America and so on, but it's getting bad conditions in different ways. And then the politicians, after they have enforced this, they look away and don't take any responsibilities for this. And then it comes with religion and different things, and the clan structure, as I said, like tribalism. It's like different gangs against each other, and then they're starting to feed or parasite on the whole welfare system and other things like that. But journalists and others have written about this, and that's good.
Okay.
But now it exists, and it's like a cancer into this society. But it comes like, I have an example of that. Like from Somalia, they try to do an educational program startup and doing business for people coming from Somalia, and they had a great track record and a business case, and also went over to America and see how people from Somalia integrated in the society in America. And they tried to do that here in Gothenburg, and that didn't succeed, because you had to ask your tribal leader if you are allowed to start a business. And you so-called, it's better to get a handout instead of working, because then you don't get, the handouts.
Right.
So it's like, it's this, talking about systemic, so-called, I don't use that word, but, but this is a systemic way of putting people into pressure.
I think it's
with criminal acts instead and so on.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point. I lived in Denmark for a while, many years ago, and I remember there, and I was struck because it was, in a sense, really different from, many of the places I'd lived in the U.S., where you had these parallel communities, where you had the Danes and maybe tourists and everyone else living in one area, in most of Copenhagen. But then you had a small section of mostly Turkish Muslims living in another section, and they had their, like you said, their entire culture. There was such a stark contrast from their culture and the Danish culture.
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm more interested in philosophy, but politics is one part of it. But here now you have a welfare system. They call it like the people's home. That's like a term that was built by the Social Democrats, and they have been in power for like 40, 50 years. And they have been in power by themselves and by the Communist or the Left Party, and also the Environmentalist Party. But now it's some kind of coalition between left and right or whatnot. But then you have the second largest party or the third largest party. I will be against them always, ideologically and philosophically, because they have a background of racist and neo-Nazis and so on. But they're called the Sweden Democrats. But you have to say that that's how the situation is now, because they look at it as like a pie chart. So if somebody come from some other country and don't integrate and don't learn the language, because Swedish is a hard language to learn in a way, they see that they take a part of the pie. And that's the same, rhetoric that Trump had with the wall and so on, and against Mexicans and so on, I think. But still, it's what people coming and maybe have a different agenda also. That maybe they want to enforce Sharia laws, maybe they want to, like we had a recent example here in Sweden, with a school by public funds that got handouts from the public system.
I see.
Teaching religious, very militant Muslims ideas. But luckily, a good thing was one political party that I'm a member of called, it's a bit funny that it's called Democratic Party, but it's not like a Democratic Party in the American sense, left-leaning, but more like a Greek word of it from the beginning. Right. But they want to, clean up things in the city. But they also raised the opinion that you could have your own beliefs and so on, but it shouldn't be taught in public school. Then, of course, we could have a debate of if we should have public schools, but that's another question.
Right.
But they managed to stop this because this school was funded in very strange ways and also then teaching very bad ideas and dangerous ideas. So this is what it has come to.
I see.
Have parallel societies. You have people, I don't know if they are sleeping cells or whatnot, but I mean, it's dangerous things going on.
I heard something happening in Sweden. Is there a trend that you know of, Martin, where immigrants don't want to speak correct Swedish? Is this true? Is it like not cool to speak grammatical Swedish? Is there a term for it?
I don't know. I could joke because, as I said, Swedish is a hard language and it's hard. I could understand if you're coming from other place to learn Swedish because it's not easy to learn that. It's very, I mean, a different language group in a way, Germanic in a way.
Right.
It's not the hardest language. I think Hungarian is that because it's belonging to the Hungarian and also coming from the other countries, so like Finnish and so on. But yeah, it's maybe it's cool to have like this broken Swedish, you could say.
Okay.
But again, it is in certain areas. But also here we have a system that you have to be forced to learn Swedish. And I say, if you don't want to learn it, that's okay if you manage. But if you want to, get other things, why not? But I don't think it should be like the same thing in America, English first. It shouldn't be all these translations and other things like that. If you want to do it by yourself. I think. I mean, it could be a business market for that. So that's probably the thing.
Okay.
But you have that you don't learn it. So, for example, during this COVID and others, then like voluntary groups found out that, I mean, in order to talk about how to protect yourself and so on, you have to do it in their language. Otherwise, they will not understand. If you have a bureaucratic, message sending out, how you should be prepared or protect yourself, that doesn't work. This is the situation and you have to deal with it in some way.
I want to ask you both now, we talked about the problems of racism and this tribalism that's spreading everywhere, both in Sweden and in the States. So maybe I can start with you, Martin. What do you think is a solution to these tribalist views? I guess I want to know if Sweden has a strong individualist trend.
Yeah, and that's the solution to, as Andrew Bernstein said, colorblind individualism. That's the solution. Period. So,
does Sweden have this trend? Do you see this happening?
Again, I would say yes and no, because that's the hard thing. And you could do all things with stats, and damn stats. But according to ResearchGate and also a World Value Survey that's pretty popular here, Sweden is a very extreme society in a way. I see myself an individualist. So I don't want to be in any corner or whatever or in a group. But as quote here is, Sweden's position in the map tells us, for example, that God has no natural place, and that's good, in our everyday lives. But we are not questioning homosexuality or abortion, and we trust others. So that's good things about Sweden. But it's also, placed in the group of like Protestant Swedes. And there you have these Sweden Democrats, as I said, the races coming from the neo-Nazis and so on. They want to have, the Swedish culture, so to speak. And you also have this individualist way, but we are having a welfare system and a people's home. So this is like clashing in a way. So it's both individualistic, but also collectivistic and also group-minded. That's why when I went on a conference and the same panel with Dr. Peikoff, he said he was happy to hear, we come from Sweden, because he said, how about religion in Sweden? And I said, in a way, it's more secular in a way, but people believe in the state doing miracles.
Yeah, so that's a problem.
That's the other side of it.
And so that's a good point. So, yeah, individualism is the solution to this horrible racism and tribalism. And I wanted to ask you, Blair, if you're optimistic going forward that we're going to be more individualist, or if you're not so optimistic given the current trend in the U.S.
Well, the current trends are obviously disheartening, but the fact remains that Ayn Rand's ideas are gaining a foothold, if you will. They have to, I wish it was a larger footprint, but at least it's been started. So there's always hope. in some way, Martin and I are doing what we can with our blog and podcast to get better ideas out there. And it's heartening to know that we are downloaded in places like India and the Middle East. And
have you gotten any responses, and what generally are people saying?
As for now, but it's getting attraction and attention, but we see it as for the long run, as I say. It's interesting to see. You see when, for example, I did this search on you and your on the podcast word, and we will be found in different places and with the guests and our own episodes. So I see positive things. I am, positive, philosophically speaking. But journalistic speaking, I am a bit, sometimes pessimistic. But then you have to be a realist also and see. I want to say again, thanks for inviting us, and you're doing a great job, Aaron, with others. That's the thing, to spread the good word, better ideas, and listen, think about it, and so on.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure speaking to both of you, and I also want to commend you on your work too, both you, Martin and Blair, because it's not easy. It takes some effort. You have to really play this for the long term.
True.
Because it takes some time to build traction and to get the word out. I'd certainly, commend both of you on doing this. Where can people find you or your work online?
Okay, my blog is secularfoxhole.blogspot.com, and the podcast is available on Amazon and how many others, Martin?
Apple Podcaster, Spotify, etc. So wherever you could find a podcast, and also you could go to secular-foxhole-captivate.fm or search for the Secular Foxhole podcast, and you will find it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Blair and Martin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.